Maybe we'll give everybody one more minute and then we will jump on in. Got a lot to cover and looking forward to this conversation. All right. I think let's go ahead and get started. We got a good 77 people online, so that's feels like a good critical mass. Welcome everyone to the West-Wide Governance Pathways Initiative Public Interest Workshop. We thank you for joining this time, knowing we had to reschedule, so we appreciate the additional time. I think we've been able to take advantage of those couple of weeks and really develop some additional ideas and dialogue within our work group that we're looking forward to sharing with you all, and then getting good feedback and input from everyone about some of the ideas that were set up to discuss today. Next slide, please. So today we're setting this up. We're gonna talk through sort of the goal. This is gonna be it's gonna look a little different from some of the other workshops that we've had, in part because we are really thinking about the work that this work group does as touching so many other aspects of the regional organization development, and the work that we've been discussing and presenting through our workshops for the other work groups. So you'll see how some of these ideas really reach across the whole spectrum of this idea and concept of a new regional organization, and how they all fit together. We'll talk a little bit about some of the tools that currently exist for protecting the public interest, and then we're going to walk through some of the ideas that we've been discussing in a handful of different categories. Then we'll have an opportunity, despite the fact that I forgot to include this on the agenda, we'll have an opportunity for stakeholder discussion, and then we will talk about next steps at the end. So with that, I would like to invite President Reynolds from the California Public Utilities Commission to talk a little bit about the overarching goal that we've set for this workshop. Thanks, President Reynolds.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathleen. And thanks to everyone for joining today. And thank you also to all of the members on the Public Interest Working Group for all of the great work in putting together the presentation and all of the progress so far. So I wanted to just step back a little bit and, kind of touch on what are we doing here? What are we talking about when we refer to the Public Interest Working Group? And really going back to the goals of the Pathways Initiative, and in particular, the goal of creating a framework that enhances independence over governance, of course, of the market, but also benefits the customers within all of the states. And so of course, the initiative seeks to really optimize reliability and optimize economic efficiency of the Western power grid, with the goal of protecting the public interest and specifically the interests of consumers. I did want to note, I think it's important to think about where we are now. So CAISO currently has an obligation to act for the benefit of the public. It specifically has duties to serve the public interest for its current footprint, the customers of those market participants within its footprint. And so I think the goal of this working group, and really in talking about the public interest, is to find a way to reflect and preserve that public interest foundation, but make it applicable, of course, to the extended footprint. So how are we going to continue to serve the public interest with an expanded footprint and with alternative different governance? So with that kind of overall goal, the Public Interest Working Group is seeking to think about and identify a combination of tools to increase protection of the public interest, again, focusing on that entire footprint and applicable to new governance of the new RO. And I think, just kind of, again, broadly, and in my mind, the importance of the public interest component is to achieve those goals that we all share: reliability and cost effectiveness of energy services. And then, of course, we all, through this initiative, are looking to foster a competitive and a sustainable market environment. And I think, we know that, and the working group has already figured out there's no one right way to do this. There's no one tool to provide strong protections and durable protection of the public interest. And so this may be an exercise of identifying a combination of tools. And I think, with this working group and stakeholder participation, the workshop, the presentation, what you're hearing today, and this workshop, we're really kind of seeking to put all of our heads together on maximizing customer benefits and protecting those benefits through the evolution to independent governance. So with that, I'll pass it back to Kathleen.
Thank you, President Reynolds. So I want to talk a little bit about, well, I'm going to pass it to Carl to talk a little bit about how the public interest is protected today, and sort of some of the things that we see in RTOs and our ISOs across the country. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. So just building on what President Reynolds just shared, there are a set of policies in place today to protect the public interest under the current context. And what we're concerned about in this workshop is thinking about carrying forward those public interest tools, perhaps adding tools that help to ensure public interest across the footprint, just thinking about if there are changes that could be made that would achieve the goals of promoting public interest for each state, for the customers of all state, and for market participants, of course. So the existing tools that we have to sort of start this conversation, first, we're going to talk about the FERC requirements. Of course, we're operating under a FERC-approved tariff. FERC is primarily concerned with non-discriminatory access to markets, that market participants are treated in a non-discriminatory fashion, and that the terms and conditions of tariffs that are established are just and reasonable for those to whom those tariffs apply. RTO and ISO structures do vary around the country. So the implementation and the approval of the FERC-approved tariff can look somewhat different in different places, but pretty much everywhere has a role for a states committee. That states committee in our current construct is called the Body of State Regulators. The states committee in the different RTOs and ISOs are in some ways similar and some ways different. One difference that some other states committee have is the ability to utilize 205 filing rights. That particular tool is not currently in the Body of State Regulators toolbox. But the states individually or through the states committee in the California ISO current construct can submit 206 pleadings to FERC as is possible in the other constructs as well. Another source of protection is the presence of an independent market monitor. FERC requires an independent market monitor to ensure that markets are not being manipulated and to ensure that there's fair, equal access to markets. At the California ISO, that market monitor is called the Department of Market Monitoring. The Department of Market Monitoring at the California ISO happens to be internal to the California ISO, but independent from the California ISO. And FERC has found it as such. There's also a market surveillance committee that the California ISO structure brings that allows for an independent panel to evaluate the state of the market, whether there are improvements that could be made to the market design, whether there are problems that need to be addressed in the market design. So they bring valuable ideas. There's also, not explicitly mentioned on this, but there is the market expert for the WEM governing body. The market expert helps the WEM governing body to evaluate what's going on with CAISO markets, brings it up in its ability to engage with entities like the Market Surveillance Committee and the DMM. So the market expert was an important addition to the set of tools that the California ISO offers to the states group, currently called the Body of State Regulators. Within the footprint, there are also public and consumer-owned utilities. Those publicly and consumer-owned utilities have charters. Those charters include requirements to protect their customers and to pursue the public interest. Of course, for those investor-owned utilities that are under the jurisdiction of a Public Utility Commission, the protection of consumers and the pursuit of the public interest happens according to statute, as the Public Utility Commission is so directed by that statute. And then finally, another active source of promoting and protecting the public interest that exists in one form or fashion in all the RTOs are consumer advocate organizations. How consumer advocates participate in the markets, what ability they have to engage on market design issues or to evaluate whether consumers' interest is being promoted by the market varies from market to market. But in the West, we do have active consumer advocate organizations that are concerned with whether their consumers are in fact benefiting from the presence of regional markets. And then finally, there are just two broad categories, which we've already referred to in passing. The state law requirements, which in our case for the California ISO, there are state law requirements that apply to the balancing area of the California ISO, and some that apply to the larger footprint of the California ISO as well. And so they feed into the charge to the Board of Governors, and in turn are conveyed to the body, or excuse me, to the Western Energy Market governing body as part of the delegation requirement. It's not a requirement, the Delegation Act. So in creating the imbalance market, creating the Western Energy Imbalance Market, the California ISO, under the action of its board, put in the Western Energy Imbalance Market and the associated institutions that go along with that market, including the RIF, the Regional Issues Forum, and the BOSSR, and some others. So these are what we're terming here as California ISO specific protections. So these weren't things that were specifically, mandated by law, but they were things that the law allowed for. And the California ISO, in creating that regional market, saw that an important need was to have more active engagement in the region in oversight of the markets that touched on those energy imbalance market entities. So thus the Western Energy Imbalance Market was created, now called the Western Energy Market governing body. And so these are some, as I said, protections that were not strictly required by law, but were permitted by law. And now just in the last 2 days, we've had the Board of Governors and the WEM governing body amend and enhance that protection to the region for the energy imbalance market and the day-ahead market going forward. And so that's another action that happened without a specific state law requirement, but was undertaken within the ability of the law as established. And it provides these additional protections and powers to the WEM governing body. So with that, this is kind of where we are today. And now I'm going to turn it back to Kathleen, and we're going to start talking about some of the tools that might be brought going forward as we establish a regional organization. Kathleen?
Thanks, Carl. I'll set this up, and then we've got a handful of different work group members who are going to talk through different aspects of this. Next slide, please. So as President Reynolds sort of set up, we are really trying to figure out how can we set up an expansive and durable framework of public interest protections through a handful of different mechanics, many of which Carl just talked about, and then some different ideas that we've got and we'll talk through here. We're really thinking about this with an emphasis on customer affordability and reliability. But I think it's worth noting that this is reliability in the context of the market dispatch, not CAISO's capacity planning functions or balancing authority functions, because we are proposing a regional organization that at least from the beginning will be only taking on authority for the market services. That's the framework for which we are sort of setting this up at this point in time. Certainly, we expect that these these public interest protections will need to, again, be durable and long-lasting and evolve as that new regional organization also continues to evolve and adds additional responsibilities and liabilities. But right now, I just want to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page about this reliability and affordability focus that we're looking at here. The other piece that I think is really important related to this public interest conversation is respecting individual state and local policies that are applicable to the loads within those states, and as those policies evolve and change, including states that do not have these policies. So we're thinking here, some states have generation preference type policies, some states have emissions goals, and there are a variety of other kind of state policies that we are really thinking through. How can we ensure that states are able to continue to retain that authority, that they are not that we're not creating a system where one state's policies are being exported to another. This is something that I think has been important to all of the states in the West as we have continued to have these conversations. So we've been really thinking about how do we create a system that explicitly acknowledges and protects the ability for states to keep that authority in place, and enables states to really develop their own vision of what the public interest is. So the big question here: how do we what tools holistically across the entire regional organization institution ensure that the regional organization protects the public interest in lieu of a single state statutory requirement, like we have with the CAISO today. Next slide, please. So the 5 categories that we are going to be talking through today are our regional organization board, the states committee, consumer advocate engagement, stakeholder process, and independent market monitor. And we are going to get started by talking through the regional organization board, and I'm going to pass it over to Ben Otto.
All right, thank you, Kathleen. I'm noting it is mid-August, the 2:30 Mountain Zone, and I'm here to talk to you about corporate law. So I hope you all are excited about that. The regional organization will, as was been mentioned, will be a corporation, a nonprofit corporation, meeting the requirements of the IRS 501c3 code. That bakes in a certain level of public interest protections because it's a nonprofit entity. And in order to qualify for that tax status, you have to show a public goal and public engagement. So that's the first layer. To build the organization, you use state corporate laws to define your organization, which are done in articles of incorporation. That's where you can reflect a lot of the existing statutory language that protects public interest. They can be incorporated into those articles, and that really becomes kind of the rules of the corporation that board members must follow. That is also, there's another layer, bylaws, more of the operations can also incorporate these principles. Charters for committees, like Carl explained, with existing in the WEIM and day-ahead governing body charter, was just amended to expand the public interest protections to be more broadly applicable across the region. Same thing can be done, and as we're working in the governance and form committee to incorporate that in these corporate documents. Then there'll be the practices of the organization. So open meetings, public notice of meetings, open records requirements. Now, these are not necessarily required by law, but as Carl mentioned, we can add those as a region if we choose to. And I think, as you've seen the launch committee thus far be fairly open with public notice and posting things, I would imagine that would continue and probably increase. Once you get the corporate form in place and approved, then you have the board is really who runs the thing. So who is on the board and how they operate becomes very important. We are proposing an extensive stakeholder process to help inform what policies go to the board and make those decisions. And then there will be annual meetings we're contemplating between the States Committee, another tool we'll talk about in a minute, and the board directly, so that there's a direct line of communication between that committee and the board of the regional organization. Next slide, please. So those board members, who they are, matters. And you can build in criteria, processes to try to emphasize public interest values. So for example, the proposal we'll put out will include kind of qualifications that we would like to see in potential board members. And they're broadly applicable in the public interest. Some words that we've included in some drafts are people with experience as regulators, as legislators, as state officials, as consumer advocate offices, or as, you know, active non-governmental advocate offices. So using those criteria, you can have people who aren't, you know, just have a market interest. They have a history of protecting the public interest in their official roles. There can be standards of duty for the board that are incorporated, like they have to act to protect the public interest. And that is then their obligation when they're acting as a board member is to follow those requirements and not their own wishes. And this broad experience includes a wide variety of things, including the commercial side, to try to get a really broad pool of experience for board members. Balancing those state officials, public policy roles with commercial roles, and you really find a healthy, robust way to identify the public interest and make those decisions. Last thing we'll talk about is we would like to have a transparent decision-making rationale. What that exactly looks like is definitely open for feedback. I would imagine they would be things like posting and writing and doing things with explanation to put it at its highest level. But this is a type of tool that can be incorporated in the specifics of our regional organization formation. Another one is effective dispute resolution process. That was another area that was just amended by CAISO around the WEIM and day-ahead markets. And so could be incorporated into the regional organization. What we have on the chart or on the slide here is an example from the Western Resource Adequacy Program. So we can look around at what is a really effective dispute resolution process for this new novel thing we're creating, a West-wide regional organization. So that's what I have in summary. The organization structure is really where you start by incorporating these public interest principles to kind of lay out the guidelines and the rules the corporation will follow. And then you build in processes of how the board is selected and operates to operationalize those protections. That's what I got, Kathleen.
Thanks, Ben. Up next, we're going to pass it to Commissioner Tawney from Oregon to talk a little bit about the States Committee. And I think we may also have Commissioner Houck from California. And then Randy Howard is going to join as well to talk a little bit about the public interest piece of this States Committee proposal. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thanks so much. And it's a real pleasure to be following such great speakers. So in the focus on centering customer affordability and reliability in the RO's decision-making, of course, the States Committee plays a role. And we start from the premise of the body of state regulators as it is today. The body of state regulators, and I think the West more broadly, has seen a real benefit from the independent staffing structure that we have accomplished through the Western Interstate Energy Board. Very, very excellent staff at CAISO, and regulators are on a whole accustomed to having independent staff and really value that, that perspective. Similarly, since the Transitional Committee set up the BOSSR, that focus on self-governance around the majority of issues, how they will approach both how they organize themselves and how they choose to engage issues that are coming forward in the current markets. That self-governance of the body of state regulators has worked very effectively, I would argue, and really empowers the regulators to engage constructively in the market design conversation. Currently, commissions nominate the state representative on the States Committee, and the States Committee operates on a consensus approach. And if that were to change, I think it would be up to the States Committee to engage that question. But there's been a lot of benefit to the West in that consensus approach and what it tells the West about where there is a strong alignment of perspectives around customer impacts. The States Committee charter can similarly center the public interest, and its funding can reflect that independence and the authority of that States Committee. The states, of course, continue to be able, regardless of participation in the States Committee, to submit to affix pleadings at FERC And the States Committee itself, even the Boxer today, could choose to do that if a decision at the CAISO around the Western EIM or the EDAM warranted it. Randy, shall I turn to you to describe a bit about the public powers?
Yes, I will do that. Thank you, Commissioner. So there's clear recognition within the launch committee that public power and the cooperatives represent many utilities in the West, not necessarily the biggest, but many utilities in the West. And our governance structure is different, and it isn't always represented by the state's committees because it's not typically jurisdictional in many states by the Public Utility Commission. And so in recognition of that, currently there's an approach taken with the WEAM where the BOSSER has public power and a PMA representative. And the PMA representative, that's the power management, probably getting that wrong now. It's the federal government, so it's really WAPA and BPA here in the West, representatives. And they have an advisory role in that BOSSER structure, and they provide input through that process. But as we're looking at this from kind of a new way of approaching it and recognizing again that the public power cooperatives and PMA have a lot of resources in the West, is having a little stronger presence on the state committee as to if the states committee has a voting type of role, ensuring that the public power has some similar. So many of the public power entities, so like a Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, a very, very large publicly owned utility. They have a governing board. They're governed by the city council and the mayor of that city. They also have a ratepayer advocate that's independent that reviews all their rates and expenses. And then many other of the public utility districts have elected officials. So they hold an election for their governance process. And so ensuring that those folks somehow have a voice in here, we're really looking closely at the role they would play in this, possibly the state's committee, and being part of that, maybe a role that might be a little bit more than advisory, depending on what the issues are. So we're still working through some of that, but just wanted to share that we do recognize, and we're really trying to ensure that they have a strong voice in what goes forward. So with that, Commissioner, I'll turn it back, I think, to you.
Thanks so much. Certainly as a member of the body of state regulators, and since we've added the liaisons, the opportunity to understand if an issue is impacting public power customers in a unique manner, either because they are operating under a different set of statutes or because they're differently situated, has been really valuable to the body of state regulators dialogue on how to protect the customer, the public interest broadly. So if we can go forward a slide. So other ways in which the states committee engages with the governance, could engage, these are tools we could add or have discussed as options, include accessing the market monitor's data or being able to request analysis within the bounds of market monitor resourcing. The Boxer has had really excellent engagement with the DMM and has found the DMM team very responsive. Continuing that and deepening that is one option. There is also, we could think about how a states committee might intersect with the stakeholder process. So how initiatives are launched or prioritized, and how either the legislated mandates or the customer protection focus that comes through the states committee can really show up in the initiatives process. So perhaps it's being able to kick an initiative off in the stakeholder process, being able to originate something in the stakeholder process to deal with a state's or local public policy issue that requires a tariff change, or more generally being able to engage in a workshop basis. And then the relationship between the state's committee and the empowered RO board is critical. So one idea is that the state's committee, in their focus on that broad public interest, can trigger a higher threshold for voting through a proposal at the RO board. Of course, the state's committee would have a seat on the RO nominating committee, but potentially could the state's committee have the ability to turn down a nomination if it's problematic enough that there's a significant number of state representatives that agree to turn it down. Of course, we've not had this case in the Western EIM and EDAM so far. We've had a very, very functional nominating committee that's worked by consensus. But as we think again about that durability over time, centering the public interest in the market design and in the market decision making, thinking about that durability, wondering about options that really allow course correction if there's drift or capture. As regulators, we're always wondering and worrying about capture of ourselves and of other people. So Kathleen, I'll leave it with that. I think that's all you need from me on the States Committee.
Thanks so much, Commissioner. I'm sure that there will be plenty of opportunities for additional comment when we get to some stakeholder questions. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Michelle Beck from the Utah Office of Consumer Services. Did I get that right?
You did. Thank you. Yes, the Utah Office of Consumer Services is the state designated consumer advocate for Utah, and I'm one of the launch committee members representing the consumer advocate sector and the public interest work group, and I'm really happy to be here today to be talking about these things. So just as a little bit of background, I wanted to start by noting that consumer advocates are created by state statute in most of the states of the West, with responsibilities that are key elements of those states' regulatory and energy policy. And this is the reason I think why we're, the whole Pathways Initiative has a strong emphasis on the public interest and on honoring the different state energy and regulatory policy. And we are an element of that. So in order to, we feel we must be able to participate in an RO in a manner that facilitates these state roles and mandates. Some of the elements that we've talked about so far, just participation in the stakeholder processes so we can represent the consumers and advance the policy of our respective states. Have access to market monitor data and be able to request analysis within the market monitor resourcing. Have a seat on the, and let's be clear about this. We're not asking for a seat on the board nominating committee. And then we've also discussed the creation of a new consumer advocate organization to coordinate and facilitate our participation. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll talk more about what we're really envisioning with this kind of an organization. First, in our view, this is absolutely necessary to ensure that the board is well informed on consumer issues. And being informed on consumer issues, we think is key to fulfilling the public interest mission that we've laid out here in Pathways. The individual consumer advocate offices really are insufficiently resourced to participate in these processes for a number of factors, but one in particular is the unpredictable timing. So it's hard to staff that since we really aren't big enough to leave someone open waiting for things to come up in the regional organization. But if there's a central consumer advocate organization with that focus, they can maintain a consistent interaction with the RO processes and then facilitate additional consumer advocate participation. So what we've been talking about is creating a different 501c3 organization so that there's sort of a landing place to accept resources and a home to really maintain that relationship with the RO, and then both, I guess, a two-way relationship, both out to the RO and also to the different member consumer advocate organizations. Now, we haven't gotten so far as to talk about the details, but we're talking, considering what are some durable funding mechanisms that could work here. And that includes the CAPS funding in PJM as a model, and I'll talk about that in a second, as well as the current BOSSR funding, although I will note that I think that some elements of the BOSSR funding make it less durable. So we would want to look at some kind of tweaking on that so that it would be a durable funding source. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with CAPS, that stands for Consumer Advocates of PJM States. It was originally created in 2013 and initially funded with some penalty money. But the funding was incorporated in the PJM tariff in 2016. So this is an organization that's been operating for over a decade and had tariff funding for, I guess, what is that, 8 years now? I included that FERC docket number where it was approved in the tariff for anyone who wants to dive a little deeper on that. In their case, it's a 501c3 organization, and they have an executive director, and it's governed by a board with members from consumer advocates from each state in the PJM footprint. And then their funding is specifically utilized for that staff dedicated full-time to PJM issues, occasional additional analytical projects, and then travel costs of individual state consumer advocate offices. So that's a model that's out there, tried and true, over a decade in place and approved by FERC. And we're looking at something similar to that model, maybe not precisely that, but using that as a starting place and considering how might it be tweaked to better meet the needs of the West. But something along those lines we think would be very important to facilitating the participation of consumer advocates. And I think that's the end of my slide. So back to you, Kathleen.
Thanks, Michelle. With that, we'll pass it over to Pam to talk us through the ideas for the stakeholder process. This has been an important one because this is one of the big areas of overlap with some of our other work group efforts. So go ahead, Pam.
Thank you, Kathleen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So we're not going to spend too much time here because, as most of you know, the stakeholder process is on its 3rd out of 4 workshops with the very much appreciated help from GridWorks to facilitate and help document the work that's going on there. Primarily what we wanted to note is that there's a significant overlap between the formation and structure of the stakeholder process and ensuring that the public interest can continue to be represented successfully in the RO's governance structure. We note that stakeholders represent a really diverse group of market participants, including participants with both a financial interest in the market as well as participants that advocate for the public interest. And that to get this process right, we have to balance those interests and perspectives through that stakeholder process. We're including provisions to enable the RO board to identify individual sector support or opposition to a proposal. Again, those are the conversations and the details that we're having in the stakeholder workshop process. And that including provisions for the written response to comments from stakeholders to really add a layer of transparency to the process. And make sure that the voice of stakeholders are recognized and brought forward to when considering tariff changes and market evolution. We are also, I think one of the really key provisions here is emphasizing opportunities for the States Committee to bring forward initiatives. And both generally and also specifically giving the states specific authority to bring initiatives to the regional organization that address state and local public policy objectives. And the idea here is that if a particular state passes legislation that requires a tariff change in the RO's tariff, that state representative on the body of state regulators would have the opportunity to nominate that or highlight that policy change and request that the RO adopt a stakeholder process that would make the necessary tariff changes to address that public policy objective, with the idea that that would be specific to that state's public policy objective and minimize the impact to non-affected states. I think there's a lot of opportunity here to continue to explore that, especially through the stakeholder process working group. But that I wanted to highlight that here because it is such a close nexus between the two different work streams that we have going on right now. Next slide. So then the second opportunity that I'll talk about here is addressing the independent market monitor. And the independent market monitor is a FERC component for all organized markets. FERC requires every market to have an independent market monitor that reports directly to the board and that provides the oversight of three particular areas of the market, including identification and reporting of market design flaws, potential market rule violations, and market power abuses. The role of the market monitor is documented extensively in FERC Order 719, but making sure that that continues to play a prominent and important role as part of this regional organization. The CAISO in particular has an internal market monitor. The market monitor can be either an internal organization where the market monitoring unit is a separate and independent unit that reports directly to the board, but does have common employment with the regional organization. So they have basically HR and other like payroll support and benefits administration through the RO, compared to where other markets are able to contract for an independent market monitor. For example, Potomac Economics is an organization that provides third-party market monitoring services to several organized markets. So we have a couple provisions here that are pretty consistent with the existing CAISO structure for the Department of Market Monitoring. Specifically, the DMM will have, and its employees will have direct access to the individual governing board members at any time, that the DMM will continue to advise the governing board and the States Committee about the DMM's independent analysis of the markets, and that the DMM will consider requests from a state commission for specifically identified information or data, including raw data concerning general market trends and the performance of wholesale markets, subject to confidentiality provisions. These are all, I think, core features that are required by FERC through Order 719, with some opportunities for the DMM to balance its core functionality, particularly around those three areas described in the top paragraph, with being responsive to states and making sure that the DMM does not become have too much of its time occupied by those requests, but as able to balance its core responsibilities with being a responsive organization. I'll also note, and Kathleen, did we put this on a separate slide? The Market Surveillance Committee.
Next slide.
Next slide. Okay, so modifying slides to make sure they're readable.
I got you.
Thanks, Kathleen. So the last feature I want to highlight here is or the last two features that are currently part of the CAISO structure and that we recommend continuing forward. The first is the Market Surveillance Committee, and this is a unique feature of the CAISO. The CAISO is the only market that has a Market Surveillance Committee, to my knowledge. But this committee is a group of independent experts and academics that act as a market advisor and providing that independent expertise both to CAISO staff as well as to management and the governing board. The Market Surveillance Committee meets on a regular basis and has full-day public meetings that are highly technical and very interesting, where they get into the technical details of new market proposals and have extensive evaluation and independent recommendations on opportunities to enhance those proposals. We propose that this committee would continue in the new regional organization and continue to provide that same functionality. And the other component of the current structure is that the Western Energy Market Governing Body employs an independent market expert that directly reports to the board or the governing body and provides comprehensive explanations and technical opinions as requested by the governing body. And this is really to enable the governing body to have its own independent analysis of tariff provisions and market design changes. And this has been an important enhancement. It was recommended through the Governance Review Committee, and that enhancement has been a benefit to the governing body members and offering significant benefits from that independent analysis. So I think this is really just highlighting some of the provisions that are present today and that we propose to have continue forward in the regional independent organization.
Thanks, Pam. With that, since we've just threw 7,000 ideas at you all, would love to open it up for stakeholder comments and questions and additional ideas, and happy to go back to previous slides to help guide things if that would be helpful to anyone. But maybe we can start and actually go ahead and go back to the goal of the public interest work group, and sort of this idea of a holistic and comprehensive approach, and even how we're setting up the public interest. Anybody have any feelings about how we have approached this? Are there other ideas? Are there other categories that we didn't even touch on that might be part of this comprehensive picture of public interest protections? Jean, go ahead and let us know who you represent.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Gene Nelson. Can you see me?
You're a little blurry, but we can hear you.
Okay, great. So Californians for Green Nuclear Power is the organization I represent. I serve as president and senior legal researcher. And this whole entire process we characterize as merely a scheme to override or overrule the will of the California legislature, who in AB 813 Holden 2018 rejected the idea of CAISO grid regionalization. So Pacific Corp, in order to preserve and expand its lucrative market to sell coal-fired power into California, and by the way, they've already sold about $1 billion, has basically put this whole thing together behind the scenes. There's nothing in today's newspapers across the state talking about this meeting. And that's not surprising, because if people really knew what was going on here, they would be furious, because the plan is simply to outsource the pollution, both the air and water pollution, from coal to serve the lucrative California market, which has a structural deficit of roughly 100 terawatt hours a year. CGMP filed a written protest, a very lengthy protest, on the in a timely fashion on May the 8th, 2024. And the only thing we received in response to that was, well, we received it, and they posted it to the WWGPI website. But that's as far as it's going to go, because Pacific Corp is expending unprecedented amounts of money. And we look at the second quarter 2024 lobbying expenditures as reported by the California Secretary of State. Annualized, it would be $24.9 million. That's never happened before in the history of this state. And that lobbying is to get this thing through. So we are strongly opposed to it. We note that the so-called public interest organizations that have supported it also in the past, many of those organizations supported the other good idea for the state, which was to have Enron serve the state. And of course, we saw exactly where that led to. Pacific Corp has a very bad history. If you look into, for example, into Oregon State, they came in, they said, oh yeah, we're going to reduce rates. It's really going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And when it actually happened, rates went way up. And of course, it's all about, again, Wyoming coal-fired power. By the way, for those that don't know it, Pacific Corp is a wholly owned subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway Energy, and Berkshire Hathaway right now is sitting on a cash hoard of about $250 billion. So they can buy anything they want. And unfortunately, the problem is that California ratepayers will end up with the worst of all worlds, because there is no meaningful way for consumers to be represented in this. It'll be much more like, well, we'll just pat you on the top of the head, and we're going to do exactly what we please. So again, we have protested this, and there has been absolutely no response from the organization saying, hey, you're bringing up valid concerns that we've got to address. We also know that it's inherent in the design of a multi-state RTO or ISO that states' environmental laws go on the chopping block. And we turn to Hughes v. Talon Energy, 2016 Supreme Court case, and also
Gene, thank you for your comments. I do see that we have a number of other folks who would like to make a comment. I do appreciate your perspective here. I will note that PacifiCorp is 1 out of 26 members of the launch committee. PacifiCorp was not the originator of this initiative.
It looks that way, yes, but they're in the government's governance.
Thank you, Gene. I would appreciate being able to respond to you without interruption. That were originated by a group of state regulators that were not, that independently requested that the launch committee be formed. And so again, this is a diverse group of participants. And I think that we will turn to Fred Hewitt, who is our next commenter, who may choose to respond to some of the accusations that you have just levied. Thank you.
I just want to say a couple quick things, and then I want to actually talk about the subject here. I was in the room in February of 1998 when Jeff Skilling from Enron came in and tried to tell the Oregon legislature what a great thing it was that Enron was going to take over PGE. Our so-called public interest organizations in Oregon staunchly opposed that, and we were proven right as events played out. I was also in the room coming down from Portland to Sacramento for quite a bit of the discussions in the state capitol in Sacramento in the 2016 to 18 period. And what the previous speaker stated is not my impression of what was actually going on. Furthermore, since the advent of the energy imbalance market, the dispatch of PacifiCorp's coal fleet has diminished because they have found a way to operate partly a little bit more flexibly, in part because of the EIM. So I just wanted to state that. But now I want to address the actual statement here on the screen and say thank you to the Pathways Committee and to everybody who's participated in coming up with this webinar this afternoon. What we see on the screen here is exactly what I had hoped for the pathways would be promoting, which is not simply to have an organized market, a day-ahead market, that day-ahead and real-time market that promotes the more efficient use of our power grid, which is very important, and we certainly agree with that, but that it also provides for directly, explicitly having an outcome of serving the public interest. That's lots of layers to that. Part of it is public policy, part of it is direct customer value, and part of it is to make the system more capable of handling a very dynamic situation we have with technology innovation, public policy, with environmental change, including climate change, and with changes in the economy, all of those things. The importance of having as large major market as we can in the West, something that my organization has been strongly in favor of, and to have this explicitly identified as an objective for the new RO is, I think, a major step forward and an evolution in the whole concept of a regional transmission organization, realizing we are not yet at that point. But, you know, I think many of us hope that eventually the RO will become a full RTO. But the kind of the generic approach to regional transmission organizations, ISOs, et cetera, whatever you want to call them, has not to this point really foregrounded the importance of public interest and public policy. It's not an easy thing to do. We have a lot of different voices, a lot of different states with very different policies, but then so do all of the organized markets in the country. And we are joining together because we see, in my view, we see the value of joint action to gain benefits that can be compatible with and advance the interests across the West, as in many cases going in quite different directions. But what draws us together is the reliability of our grid and the value that that provides. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Mark?
Yeah, thanks. Just to introduce myself, I'm Mark Specht. I'm with the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I'm also a launch committee member, though I'm not on this particular work group. I'll just start by saying I also couldn't disagree more with Gene's characterization, but don't want to focus on that. I want to focus more on the question at hand here and offer some high-level thoughts on the framing of this workshop so far. And overall, I really love this approach. I love all the different, I love framing it as a toolbox with all these different tools for protecting the public interest. And I'm really looking forward to continuing the launch committee work to develop these ideas. I think in addition to all these ideas, one other tool that we should have in the toolbox for protecting the public interest is really allowing and enabling the public to participate in RO decision making to the extent that that's appropriate. And so I think especially when it comes to some of the topics Pam was talking through about protecting the public interest in the context of the stakeholder process, I would love to see more tools in our toolbox for, like I said, enabling the public to participate there. And so just to throw out a couple ideas of like what that actually could tangibly look like, I think things we might consider would be creating some sort of Office of Public Engagement similar to FERC's Office of Public Engagement that would really serve as a resource for folks who are interested in participating and having their voices heard in RO decision making. I think one other thing we should consider is setting up some sort of intervener compensation program so that groups that don't have the resources to actually show up and advocate for their views could get the resources to do that and have their voices heard and lead to better decision-making outcomes at the regional organization. So I think, when it comes to protecting the public interest, what we've talked about so far in this workshop have been like very formal structures with regulators and consumer advocates and public power having those formal structures in place for protecting the public interest, which is fantastic and which is necessary. And I think on top of that, I'd love to see more effort put into actually enabling the public to participate. So thank you, and looking forward to developing those ideas more.
Thanks, Mark. Anyone else on the sort of overarching goal, and then we can get into some of the specific topic areas. Nick.
Hi, so Nick Berkey from Anaheim. Mark there just actually made a comment that's perked my ears up a little bit. I absolutely agree with him in terms of having some sort of program available for the public to participate in these processes, whether it's stakeholder initiatives or just general rulemakings or getting their thoughts across. However, I would be opposed towards having some sort of, for lack of a better term, intervener compensation awarded to them, just solely due to the fact that the costs of those compensations would be borne by a load, and rates should be reflected of generation and transmission and actually delivery of power, not payments to the general public for participating in a process. But however, I do agree that if there's some sort of independent office, like a ratepayer advocate or just some other program that is available to all and not just specific compensation to individuals, that I could be supportive of, my organization could be supportive of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Commissioner Hammond.
Hello, thank you, Kathleen. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Sometimes my I'm computer deficient. I appreciate the meeting. Thank you all for the presentation. I know this is the first meeting. I think the challenge is defining exactly what the public interest is for this group. I think there are obviously common interests in keeping costs low and reliability, but I worry about when we start getting into policy areas and what impacts that might have on the individual states that have different policies. We are solely economic regulators. We have no authority here in Idaho to initiate policy without legislative authority. So my fear is you start incorporating things, too many things in the toolbox, you might get a reaction legislatively from particular states. And ultimately, we have to be focused here, as I think everybody does, on costs and what the economics are. And while I respect other states' choices with regard to policy, to the extent that those things could impact cost without a consumer benefit to those regions that don't have those policies, I'm just not sure how you do that. So I think it's very important that we define exactly what public interest we are trying to protect and move forward then. But the last thing I just wanted to make clear to you, it's a point I've made a couple times, and I know there was no intent to suggest that everybody in the region, every state regulator in the region, was part of the Pathways Initiative or the formation. Idaho is not, as everybody knows. We're following now and participating because it's better to be at the table and listen and figure out what can work. Particularly when you have utilities that have committed to it, Pacificorp, to EDAM, and Idaho Power is leaning that way. So we need to be at the table. But I want to make sure when we start talking about state regulators, we're not including those that didn't initially. And I appreciate those that went out on the limb and had the courage to try to find a solution. So no knock there. I just want to make sure that we're clear about how the thing started. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Commissioner Hammond. And I think you raise a couple of really important points. I think we have worked very hard to make it clear that this Pathways Initiative was kicked off by a letter from regulators in 5 states: Washington, Oregon, California, New Mexico, and Arizona. But we
Yes,
are
I
also,
think you have. I just, I appreciate that. Sorry. Thank you.
Absolutely, no. I appreciate the sensitivities, and I think we are very much trying to find a way, and I'm thrilled that you're here and willing to share some of your perspectives, because I think we're building something that will have impacts on most, if not all, Western states. And so ensuring that we are incorporating perspectives from those who were not part of this at the beginning is imperative. We have the opportunity to build something here. And so your willingness to show up and share your perspective is really very much appreciated. And I think, just if I may, on the other piece, I think you've hit one of the really challenging needles that we're trying to thread here, is how do we explicitly acknowledge and enable states to not just set, but enforce and protect their own definition of the public interest, their own policies as they set them, as the legislature set them, as for whatever forum they get set in different states, while ensuring that they are not impacting and overlapping into other states. I think that's been something that we have been very cognizant of and continue to try to work on. So very much appreciate that flag
Thank
here.
you, Kathleen. I do appreciate that. And we're just, it's difficult when you have such a broad footprint. Everybody's going to have their own set of interests in their toolbox. And I just think that the clear ones are where you started, where President Reynolds started with was reliability, and I don't want to say she said cost, but maybe affordability to customers. And I just keep those things simple, and maybe I don't know, just my thought. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vijay.
Hello, Vijay Satar, WRA. I have a couple of comments. One, I appreciated I think if I understood correctly from, I think Pam or somebody who was speaking, that you would like to borrow or continue the MSC concept, which is the Market Surveillance Committee that CalISO currently has. I think that's going to be very valuable and needed in this new RO structure. So I urge that conversation to happen simultaneously and be developed, not wait till future changes and RO being set up and then being an item of the formation committee. I leave that to you guys, but WRA is working very hard to promote and suggest in the SPP Markets Plus that they have a market advisor. The PIOs had supported the market expert that reports to the governing body. So in all, that's very critical and needed. So that's one of my 3 comments. Second, I feel if somebody wishes to share their skepticism or concern with regionalization efforts, they should not just provide evidence, but perspective that is constructive, because 90% plus of the utilities footprints have interconnections or ties to neighboring regions. And time and again, reliability has been saved or enhanced through regionalization and diversity of resources being shared. That's just a comment to Dr. Nelson. I'm happy to meet with you one-on-one if you like. Number 3 is a specific comment around the RAP program. I am curious about how the RAP will interface with the RO structure, because if you're going to take on resource adequacy as one of the functional elements of the RO, then how will it interact with the RAP? Are we going to create duplication? Entities are still not fully committed to the RAP. So I just want to bring that up as a question/comment to keep in mind, because that's going to be very critical. And I in closing, I support Mark in that there should be, everybody thinks public interest means only consumer interests or ratepayers. I hope the true public interest that includes societal net benefit is also kept in mind when you are developing policies and strategies. Thank you.
Thanks, Vijay. And happy to let others weigh in here. I think related to the RAP program, because at this point in time, we are just talking about the EIM and EDAM markets. We aren't taking on how the RO is going to interact with the RAP program. I think that's going to be a future task that the RO will need to figure out.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair. Thank you.
Yep. Jim?
You kind of covered. I just wanted to note that we are focused on governance here, and we're kind of drifting into market design. But I do know that the ISO is working with Western Power Pool to make sure they understand how they can integrate the RAP program in with EIM and eventually with EDAM. And the solution will probably be the resource efficiency test.
Thanks, Jim. All right. Maybe we can go to the RO board, and go to those slides and see if anybody has any specific input on or comments on the ideas around incorporating some of these protections into the RO board. And again, this includes really sort of the institutionalization of this priority in its in the very foundational documents that create the RO, that really kind of set some of these things up. Vijay, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I didn't mean to nitpick, but I think the charter provision should definitely include the unfortunate term called mandate, because California has mandates on storage, Oregon has its own, Washington has now the cap and trade version. So I think it should be climate policies and other mandates or something. I think we should be very clear to include that right from the get-go into the articles, my opinion. Thank you.
Would you, if it were to say public interest and state and local policy?
Yes, that would be better than just saying climate policies. So that is a more overarching term that would include whether it's climate policies, whether it's emission requirements or technology mandates, anything. Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we had some conversations about, again, even some states that may have some generation preference type policies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. And that reflects too some of the language that we'll see in the change of the charter of the WEM governing body as a result of step 1, as including this state and local policy priority. Any other questions or comments on the RO board? Jessica.
Hi, Kathleen. Thank you. Yeah, just a few questions actually. One is, there were a few ideas kind of floated out there today in terms of, I know Commissioner Tani had a suggestion about the ability to decline a nomination or to reject or, intervene with a nomination for a board member. There was some talk about creating another committee or basically a funding structure for Consumer Advocate's Office. So I'm just curious to what extent these are just ideas, thoughts, proposals, and to what extent they are going to be part of the step 2 proposal that's, without further discussion, that they're just going to become part of that proposal.
Again, happy to open to any of my fellow work group members. Ben, did you want to take this?
I'll start, but what we're talking about today are a basket of tools, options that we are really looking for feedback on how to shape those, how to prioritize those, if any things are missing, so that we can develop a proposal that will then go out, and there will be an opportunity for further comment on that before the launch committee kind of finalizes things. Then at some point, various parts of the proposal split out to who has to implement them. So there'll definitely be a little bit further process here. And today is about collecting input on these broad set of ideas.
And I think, thanks, Ben. And if I can add just one thing on here, I think the group has been pretty adamant among ourselves that this is not yet a proposal, that really this is just a set of ideas that we wanted to get some feedback from and see if through this workshop and through the comment that we receive, there are things that people really like, if there are things that people really don't like, that will help us craft our ultimate proposal that comes out at the end of September.
Thank you. Yeah, very helpful. And I also just want to acknowledge support for one of the earlier statements that Pam made about balancing the interests between those that have a financial stake in the market and the other kind of bodies that we're talking about. So very appreciative of that. And, you know, our kind of primary driving interest is consumer protection. And so we see this as a natural outcropping of our business and what we do. So really appreciate that. Couple other questions, if I'm allowed.
Yeah.
One was for Ben in the beginning, he talked about statutory authority and sort of bringing in the state statutory authorities into the RO articles of incorporation. And I'm just curious, to the extent that a state does not have similar language, or that language goes beyond what a state has, how would the launch committee or RO or whatnot propose to address that? And how does, in other words, how does this RO have kind of uniform statutory authority over a multi-jurisdictional framework?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it gives me an opportunity to clarify something that is a little bit confusing. So the articles of incorporation for the corporation, for the RO, those are not laws. They're not like a statute passed by a state. They're just the rules adopted by the board to govern themselves. And what we're saying here is that those rules for the organization can reflect the ideas or kind of the principles that we see in public interest protection in state statutes. And I think Commissioner Hammond made a good point of finding first the features that are commonly held across the whole West. So things like cost, affordability, things like reliability. So this will be a little bit of a practice of kind of surveying the playing field, finding those most commonly held public interest protections that we see out there, and then crafting those into what are kind of the corporate documents. Now, that does not become actual legislation. It just is the rules for the corporation itself. Does that help? There's a little bit of a little bit complicated to explain. Hopefully I got it.
No, thank you, Ben. It does. Just trying to understand the underlying sort of authority for that kind of authority. And then, but that's helpful. And then lastly, I wonder if the launch committee or this committee on which work group are we in today?
Public interest.
Public interest. Thank you so much. If you all have considered the sort of aggregate per megawatt hour cost that might be estimated for creating things like a CAPS funding structure raised by Michelle, or created by some of these new kind of structures that would need to be funded and maintained.
We're doing that research, not just for what we're talking about here today, but down to the whole creation of the regional organization itself. So these components, but then the whole thing. So we're working on developing those cost estimates, and that will be reflected in what we come back to. That just takes time and depends on what the actual proposal looks like, right? But it's definitely something we're researching, we'll be considering.
So you would expect those estimates to come out somewhat hand in hand with the step 2 proposal?
I'm gonna let Kathleen answer that one.
I don't think we know yet exactly how it's going to be set up, but I think your question gets to the bigger question of how much are these recommendations going to cost? Certainly understanding that cost is a big consideration for where people fall on the spectrum of what we should be doing. And so I think to the extent that we can look at other examples and see how much a certain structure costs somewhere else, who bears those costs, and incorporate that into how we determine what our recommendation will be. I think we are aiming to have as transparent a proposal from a cost and benefit standpoint as we possibly can. So but to the extent that we can put some numbers and estimates to these various tools, that is something we will aspire to do for sure.
Great. Thank you for taking my questions. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jessica. Anyone else on the RO board? All right, great. Thanks, everybody. Let's move to the States Committee. We have included a handful of different ideas and roles for the States Committee. Again, kind of trying to start to take the BOSSR as a starting place, and thinking about how it operates today and why, and how we might enhance that operation within a recommendation that recognizes the functionality of the BOSSR as it exists. So curious if anybody has any thoughts or questions about structure or governance or the role of public power. I find it hard to believe that no one has thoughts or feelings about this. Any of our public power representatives want to share thoughts, ideas? Bad.
Hi, I'm not sure what my organization's position would be. I'll just, and I think this was encompassed in the slides, but with some of the proposals that are discussed in the slides and some of the ideas to increase the jurisdiction and authority of the States Committee, it just seems intuitive that it would be an opportunity to also have a fresh look at public power's role on that committee generally. And again, I think that concept was encompassed in the slides, but I'm just reiterating it. And that's probably all I'm prepared to say at this point. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Thad, and it's good to see you. We're glad you're in the mix again. Commissioner Aguilera.
Hello. So I'm reacting to the slides on the screen because I had another meeting, and so I wasn't actually here for the description of this. But I did want to react to part of this. Actually, let me back up a little bit. Hold on. So I'm a commissioner from New Mexico. I'm also on the BOSSR. I am not necessarily representing those, views from New Mexico or the Bosser. So standard disclaimer. And so in reacting to this bullet where under role of public power, it says in those situations, public power representatives will also have voting right. That's something that I think is different than what exists currently, and something that I would definitely want to take back to the Bosser. I will note that, as Commissioner Hammond mentioned earlier, public interest is not necessarily the same for all states. And it's also true depending on what perspective you have. In New Mexico, the public interest includes the interest of the public and the interest of investors, and balancing those interests. And so I would be hesitant to agree that public power and state commissioners have a common view of what the public interest is, or at least our laws in individual states might say otherwise. And so, again, not speaking for the Bosser or the New Mexico Commission, but this is something that caught my eye, and so something that I would want to continue to discuss. In terms of the higher level structure that, it sort of seems like Bosser's, staffing structure and self-governance would remain the same. I do really appreciate and think it's valuable that the Bosser has influence, and into the stakeholder processes. And, even when we talk among the Bosser, it's not always easy to come to consensus. And so I think that including yet another voice that I think is probably different, at least for me, causes me some pause. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Hammond.
Thank you. And taking off of what Gabe said, I should be careful. And yeah, I'm here today listening, and I'm not always great about defining who I'm appearing before and what my capacity is. And so I am a member of Bosser too. I want to be clear that do my best in trying to remain neutral, since I think today I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm here sort of in that role for Bosser, and if I cross the line, but I'm trying to find that spot to, be neutral and try to find common interest, while at the same time, knowing what Idaho has. And so I just want to, I appreciate Gabe's remarks, and good to be disclose what we're here for and why. So thanks, Gabe.
Commissioner, you are a little hard to hear, but I think if I'm getting it, it's that there's the dynamic even between the states, and trying to find the right way to engage between states and find consensus. Is that sort of the gist of where you're going?
Yes, and I appreciate, if you can hear me, I appreciate what Gabe said, because I think that's, he hit the nail on the head there. So said it much better than I could. So thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Kathleen, I wonder if I could respond.
Yeah, please.
Pull that thread a little bit. I think one of the conversations that has been key across the policymaking community in the West for several years now is this sense of reciprocity. So for me, it's really key that this idea of respecting a state's generation preferences, for example, if that is something that needs to be respected in the market in some fashion, is not about only one set of states' preferences, but about everybody's, and that we are really seeking, and so in these slides, as the Pathways Initiative has been talking about this, I see a lot of caveats around policies for a state's own load, policies for generators that are jurisdictional to that state, really trying to bound that in the sense that sort of my legislature might put requirements on me, Utah legislature might put different requirements on Utah fleet, and yet even with that, there is likely significant customer benefit in figuring out how to use the machines we've had to procure as efficiently as possible. And so really trying to find that sweet spot that I think you're talking about, Commissioner Hammond, making it possible for folks to enter the market without impacting their neighbors inappropriately. It's a balance, all while we're all deeply impacted by each other at the bilateral market hubs, but that's so much less visible, much less apparent than it is when you come into a market conversation. So I keep looking to those caveats, those boundaries as key for respecting that sense of reciprocity, as opposed to the market picking somebody's policies and steamrolling everyone else's.
Thanks, Commissioner. Randy.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate some of the comments. I couldn't really understand Commissioner Hammond too well, but Commissioner Aguilera, as to the public power, and I spoke to this and it sounds like you missed it, but really looking at the potential of an expanded role of the state's committee in the RO, recognizing that what we're talking about as to public power, because public power is such a big presence in the West, large owners of resources as well as transmission, and trying to ensure, and they have unique policies themselves, right? They have different policies than many of the states. I know some of my member communities, they're already at 100% emission free, and some have very aggressive goals themselves, but they also have a different business structure. So their decision making is a little different. But I think what we're looking at here is the collective. How do we come up with the best options going forward? And if they have an expanded role in their relationship with the RO governing body or board, the thought here was that the public power should be more than advisory if it's coming down to those types of decisions or voting types of decisions. And that's what we would be seeking, but they're not. What we've been discussing is public power governing body members. So typically an elected official, say a mayor of a community that has public power, or something that would represent the broader publicly owned utility sector. So, and we're not talking the same as just having an individual that works for a utility participating. We're talking again about a governing person that would be elected to serve their utility and could or be willing to be a participant. But as you know, part of our discussion too is it's really hard to find people that have the time and willingness to do these kinds of things. So that's the other challenge, but that's kind of the role we're thinking, to ensure that those folks feel they have a voice here and can influence decision making that occurs with the RO, especially when it comes to tariffs, because again, some of their business structure, there's just true differences.
Commissioner Aguilera, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. I'll respond. I appreciate that. Thank you for that explanation. I think, what I was trying to highlight is there definitely, if you think about it as, like a Venn diagram, there definitely is overlap. But I think there is a part of that Venn diagram where there is not. And so With respect to having a voice, I certainly agree that public power needs one, and not trying to say that that voice should not exist. I agree with you that it did. I just questioning whether this is the correct structure for that, is to combine it with state regulators, and just thinking of that other part of the Venn diagram where it doesn't overlap. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Tony?
Good afternoon. Commissioner Aguilera, I think as Commissioner Tawny will attest to, the questions and thoughts you're raising right now are highly analogous to the questions and thoughts that were raised and the discussions that were had when the current structure of the BOSSR was put together and the role for public power liaisons. And so I really look forward to having that dialogue, and fairly confident, as we did the last time, that we'll be able to sort it.
Thank you, Tony, and absolutely appreciate having your voice on the BOSSR. So thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Any other thoughts or questions about the States Committee? And all right, great.
Maybe we could roll forward a slide just to
Oh yeah,
prompt
remind
people.
everybody.
Thank
I
you,
do
Tony.
want to thank all of the commissioners who have taken the time to be here today. I know you all have extremely busy schedules, and your presence and your input really is really meaningful. So thank you for taking the time. And especially those who have been serving on the work group. All right, if we have nothing else, we can always come back at the end, but maybe we can move to our consumer advocate engagement ideas. Again, we sort of have a couple of different thoughts here from an individual consumer advocate office perspective, as well as a new consumer advocate engagement or consumer advocate organization that could help coordinate some of the interface between the RO board and the offices. I don't want to put anybody on the spot here, but maybe something that we have not fully captured here. And I'd be interested if anybody has any thoughts about the non-consumer advocate offices. I know this is not meant to be exclusive of those entities, and having more structure around consumer advocate engagement will benefit both those from a state statutorily created office to some of the other separate consumer advocate organizations, but curious if anybody has any thoughts on that, since that's not something we spent much time on. Julie, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, to what Michelle was saying. I'm Julie Halligan. I'm representing the Public Advocates Office in California. It's the Public Advocates Office at the California Public Utilities Commission. So we primarily represent small commercial and residential, so small customers that typically have, really aren't able to represent themselves in front of the California Commission. And along with Michelle and all the other Western states consumer advocates offices that are, part of state statute, we feel it's really important to have an organization, a consumer advocates organization that's able to participate in the RO process and not just facilitate the participation of their fellow other states, but also participate and have access to the RO board. I mean, I agree, strongly with, what Mark said earlier, that it's really important for the public to be able to participate, but we know that individuals don't have the time or resources. We barely have the time and resources as in our own offices. And in a regional organization, that's going to get exponentially more difficult for us. And it would be extremely difficult for individuals to participate, even if there was, and I think the Office of Public Engagement is a great idea. But even if there was, it's still very, very participate, as I see in the California Commission, for individuals to make a difference in the decision-making that happens at the commission. So I think I just want to reiterate how important the Consumer Advocates Organization is to the structure of, regional RO going forward. And happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Julie. Appreciate your input and helping come up with some of these ideas as well. Any questions for our consumer advocates offices that we have represented here, California and Utah? What about on the next slide with the CAPS program? Any questions about this idea? If there's other examples that people might have? All right, well, with that, then maybe we can go to our stakeholder process. Interested to see if anybody has any additional ideas. Again, as Pam mentioned, we've had 3 stakeholder workshop process workshops, 3 stakeholder process workshops already. And so have talked some about some of these, but this is really thinking about, from a how the state's committee may engage directly in the stakeholder process. Thinking about the value of the stakeholder process as far as protecting the public interest. I think capturing some of that in the charter and other governing documents is important as well, to make sure that we are thinking about the stakeholder process as one of these tools. So capturing it there too is something else we've been thinking about. Any questions or thoughts on the stakeholder piece? All right. What about the independent market monitor or the market services committee or market expert? Michelle.
There we go. I think I just wanted to emphasize that we've only started our discussion on this. So I don't want it to be misinterpreted as an endorsement. As we said at the beginning, these are all ideas that are still being workshopped, like today. But I think, in my view, we need to do a little bit of additional evaluation of sort of the idea of internal versus external and some of the other differences we see in other markets, to make sure that we take advantage of this point of inflection here. There's something that might be even better, even though I don't hear a lot of specific complaints about the DMM. So I just wanted to make that point while we were on this subject.
Thanks, Michelle. That is a good point. We have the market monitor has come up occasionally in conversation in other work groups, and it's like, I think the other one's talking about this and they're talking about this. So we are very much at the beginning of this discussion. So input and ideas on this are welcome. Fred.
Yeah, I've long felt that on a kind of broad basis, if looking at it from a kind of good governance point of view, it would be best to have a fully independent market monitor that wasn't part of the organizational structure for CAISO or any of the RTO ISOs, but there are a lot of different models for this with various shades across the country. And my observation is that on the whole, and I have some complaints about a couple of the market monitors in the East, but I won't go into that. But I feel even in that case that the market monitoring concept and construct has worked out quite well. It's evolved a fair bit over the last quarter century. One of the most important things they can do is to provide referrals to FERC for compliance. And I think that part has worked quite well, especially at CAISO, where the DMM has performed that pretty vigorously, in addition to all the regular reporting and oversight that it does. The other distinguishing feature of CAISO today is I think somebody already noticed that, mentioned this, the Market Surveillance Committee. My concern there is you have 3 very experienced people, but they've been there a very long time. Should that committee be a larger one, or should it have more rotation? Is a good point to think about. But again, I think that their contribution, I'm thinking of a couple of recent reviews that they've done in the last couple of years, where I think that both the Market Monitor and the MSC have actually provided a lot of a real value. And I think this is an appropriate time to look again at their purpose and function and what their capacity is or do they have enough to do the job that we really need them to do? So I basically don't have a recommendation here, but just to say, I think this is often an overlooked part of the overall equation and something that really does need some review at this point.
Thanks, Brad. If anybody else has experience where the Market Monitor or Market Surveillance Committee type structures are different and work well or don't work as well, we'd be very interested in those kinds of experiences. Nick, you're on mute.
My apologies. I put my hand down but didn't unmute myself. Sorry, Nick Berkey from Anaheim Public Utilities again. I know I'm on the not so much the public side, but rather the load serving entity side. But I have to say that I have always been coming up through the operations side of the industry. I've always been incredibly respectful and impressed by the job that the ISO's Market Monitor does. They do a great job of identifying issues and conveying them. And I think a good example was when they had concerns with the congestion revenue rates a few years back, and were ready to take it to FERC in order to make changes. And the ISO did make changes, probably not up to the Market Monitor's liking, but they did have a significant impact in the markets, which was always good. Market surveillance committees, I listened to most of those, and although they're pretty high level and on the academic side, I mean, I think it's a good dichotomy where you have the what I like to call the academics and the market monitors, the realists, who one talks about what should happen, the market monitor sees what actually happens. So I think it's a good system that the ISO has, and the market monitor truly is independent at the ISO and is willing to take it to that level. And actually, I should rephrase one step back, and I wish they would just take that independence a little bit farther, just in my opinion, and be willing to push staff to make much more thorough changes instead of just partial changes that should fix the problem just enough.
Thanks, Nick. That's really helpful. Anything else on the Market Monitor? All right, Cameron.
Yes, hello. I'm Cameron Reed with Puget Sound Energy, and there was just something I wanted to bring up kind of as we're talking in public interest, and that is like data protection as well as some of this other stuff. And as the launch committee is contemplating, more groups or expanding sort of committees that would have access to, request data from the market monitor or analysis from the market monitor, that like similar kind of confidentiality and data protection be sort of applied to those avenues as well, because the more people that have data, the harder it is to protect it. And that's especially the case as more like the footprints gets larger. So that's just kind of something to throw out there to keep in mind.
Thanks, Cameron. I think that is something that somehow didn't make it into these slides, but is definitely something that has come up in our discussion. So really appreciate the flag. I think it's a really important aspect of when, as we've been talking about access to market monitor data within the confines and constraints of those confidentiality agreements, is something that's been really important. So thanks for flagging that. We'll make sure that is incorporated and reflected. Anything else on market monitor? Anything else on this conversation as a whole? Because if not, I'm going to jump into sort of our next steps. All right, great. Well, this is this is our last public interest workshop, but as we've mentioned, we still have there are still things that we've sort of barely scratched the surface on, some ideas that we continue to want to explore, and we would welcome your input and feedback, both on the topics that we discussed today, and then any additional ideas that you have that we're missing, or that we need to that we should consider in a different way. We have a public comment period opening today that will run until August 29th. This is, you can submit them at the same comments email address that we have had open for all these comment periods. This is all of this information, including this recording of this presentation and the slide deck, will be posted on the Western Interstate Energy Board Westwide Governance Pathways Initiative landing page. Thanks again to Weeb for continuing to host and post all of these documents for us. Next slide, we have one more Pathways Initiative workshop scheduled. That is our 4th stakeholder process workshop. We will be walking through a bit of a straw proposal. Certainly not anything, it won't be comprehensive and fully complete, but we wanted to sort of share some ideas on paper, and based on a lot of the feedback that we've gotten in our first 3 workshops, and get some feedback on sort of a proposal on paper. That workshop will be August 28th at 9 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Mountain, 11 Central. And we will have some materials out in advance of that workshop. So would appreciate your participation and input in that opportunity as well. And then just as a reminder, this is our anticipated timeline. This has not changed through our workshops this far, but just to walk quickly, we are in the process of starting to draft up some of these recommendations, and hopeful to have a revised step 2 final draft revised proposal out on September 26th. We will have an open comment period for 4 weeks on that step 2 proposal, and we will have a stakeholder meeting / workshop on October 4th to walk through that proposal and answer questions and hear comment at that point. Comments on that proposal will be due October 24th, and then we will be working to incorporate feedback and input from stakeholders over the next couple of weeks, with the goal of putting out a final proposal on November 15th, and have the launch committee take up that final proposal for a public vote at a stakeholder meeting on November 22nd. I want to take a minute to thank my fellow public interest work group members. This has been a lot of work and a lot of really important conversation. There's been a lot of creativity. There's been a lot of ideas, and we have tackled some issues that have been hard to deal with for many years. So I want to thank everybody for being willing to continue to show up with an open mind, and want to thank everybody else for showing up today and kind of hearing how some of those ideas are coming together. Really appreciate your thoughts and input and questions, and look forward to seeing your written comments in a couple of weeks. And with that, if there's nothing else, I will give you all an hour back. And again, thanks for your interest in the Pathways Initiative and for your participation. And we'll talk to you soon.